find strength and find peace. Bethesda Temple, the home of grace.
Good morning. Welcome to the home of grace. It was late spring, a day not unlike today, when one of the most awesome events that ever happened to mankind occurred. I'm talking about the day of Pentecost, when the Spirit of God fell from heaven and anointed His church. We're going to be talking about that today because of the implications that Pentecost has for us today. There is great power and great deliverance, great freedom for you today, all because of Pentecost.
I know I didn't merit it. I know I couldn't buy it, but I thank God because He saved me.
Allow me to digress from this dynamic manifestation of the Spirit of God found in the second chapter of Acts to talk about the original celebration of the Feast of Pentecost. Pentecost is known by several other names. It is known as the Feast of Weeks. It is known as the Feast of the Harvest. It is known as the Feast of the Barley Harvest. And it is known as the Feast of the First Fruits. During the Feast of Pentecost, people would take an offering made of the first fruits, which was beaten into meal and then baked. This they would wave as an offering unto the Lord on the 50th day after Passover. The 50th day is the culmination of 7 weeks after the Passover. Stay with me. The number 50 is symbolic as well. It is symbolic of Jubilee, a celebration of freedom. Pentecost also commemorated the time that God gave the law to Israel at the foot of Mount Sinai. Isn't it awesome? 50 days after the very first Passover, the children of Israel found themselves at the foot of Mount Sinai, where God gave them the law. Now, understand that the law in and of itself was an act of grace. We speak of law, no, not today. We speak of law and we speak of grace, rarely mixing the two. But I submit to you today that the giving of the law was in itself an act of grace. God was, before the law, completely inaccessible to Israel until He gave them the law as a means of approach to Him. This system of rules, this system of ordinances and sacrifices gave man a means of approach and a means of access to God, who had been heretofore inaccessible and unapproachable. This was indeed a blessing from God. But along with this blessing came a unique problem. And that problem was, as gracious as it was, God giving the law began to show up our faults and our sins. Through the law, we could see just how vile we really are. The law paints a very vivid picture of our sinful nature and of our shortcomings. Let me tell you something about the law. The law was very adept at showing us where we had sinned. The law was very adept at showing us when we had sinned. The law was very adept at showing us how we sinned and just how long we'd be paying for that sin. But the law possessed nothing inherently that could help us with our sin problem. There was no provision for the removal or for the eradication of sin from our lives. Oh, there was provision for covering. The sacrifices would cover sin, but they were only effective until the next sin. Think about it now. You offer a sacrifice on the Day of Atonement to cover your sin, and you're good until the next sin. Oh my. Some of us would go broke making sin offerings. Every day we'd be down at the temple waving something before God. Because these things were good, they were one-time only sacrifices. That's it. It's good for one time, and if you messed up after that, you just have to come back with another offering. Did not eradicate sin from our lives. These sacrifices could not make atonement. They could not make payment for our sin. So then, although the law was in effect a product of the grace of God, it offered no lasting hope for man. The plight of man was echoed by a 17th century preacher by the name of John Bunyan, as he wrote these words from a dark prison cell. "Run, John, run, the law commands, but gives me neither legs nor hands." How you gonna run without legs? And you can't even crawl if you don't have legs and hands. The law commands you to run, but gives you no power to do it. But thanks be to God that neither Bunyan nor we were left to live our lives in that sorry state. Bunyan went on to write, "Far grander news the gospel brings. It bids me fly and it gives me wings." Now, here is something that even as vile and as sinful as we are, something we can deal with. The gospel. The good news that Jesus saves. And I just rose to tell you, Jesus is the star of the gospel. The gospel is the message of God's grace. Jesus came to us, as John put it, full of grace and truth. Now think about this for a moment. We were not deserving of the measure of grace that came in the law, yet Jesus comes full of grace and truth. He came not only to bring us truth, he came to bring us grace. Not just